Julian Vance was the unchallenged prince of New York City's elite, the most arrogant and untamed of them all. He was devastatingly handsome, the kind of man whose lips, when quirked in a smirk, could effortlessly steal the souls of 1,000 women. They said the line of women who had thrown themselves at his feet could stretch from Midtown to the Hamptons, but Julian couldn't be bothered to even glance their way. Until his best friend, Leo, made him a bet. "Julian, if you can win over my sister, Isabel Sterling, you can have your pick of any car in my garage." Isabel Sterling, the formidable CEO of Sterling Industries, an ice queen in every sense of the word, cool, disciplined, and untouchably proud. She was the unattainable prize coveted by countless heirs, a woman so fiercely guarded it was rumored not even a male mosquito could get near her. But Julian just laughed. When he wanted something, he never failed to get it. Fate, however, had other plans. On the very first day of the bet, he stumbled upon Isabel, drugged and vulnerable. Julian, who had already been planning his approach, found himself becoming her unwitting antidote. After that night, it was as if he had chiseled a crack in her impenetrable glacier. For 3 years, they were inseparable, and in the countless moments of intimacy they shared, Julian's heart slowly, irrevocably, surrendered. He believed that this woman, worshipped by so many from afar, finally belonged to him. Until tonight. After a heated encounter in the back of his car, he noticed she had lost one of her sapphire earrings. He picked it up, intending to return it. The door to the private room at the end of the hall was slightly ajar. As he reached for the handle, he heard the sound of laughter from within. "Isabel, you look like the cat that got the cream. That Julian Vance kid. He's usually a rabid dog, snarling at everyone. How is it that with you? He's so sweet and obedient. It makes my skin tingle just watching. So, when are you going to marry him?" Julian's hand froze. His heart gave a strange, insistent lurch. Then he heard it, the voice he knew better than his own, as cool and clear as ever. "He's just a bed partner. Why would I marry him?" 7 words, delivered so casually, yet they were like 7 daggers of ice, plunging directly into Julian's heart, leaving nothing but a mangled, bloody mess. A strange, dead silence fell over the room. Clearly, even her circle of friends was stunned by the brutally frank definition. After what felt like an eternity, someone broke the silence, her voice hesitant. "No, seriously, Isabel, it's been 3 years. Are you still hung up on him? The one that got away? The one that got away?" Julian's mind went blank, a roaring static filling his ears. Isabel had someone else. He stood outside the door like a puppet with its strings cut, hollowed out, as he heard Isabel's cool affirmation. When we broke up, he told me to take 3 years, to try seeing other people, and he would do the same. If we still loved each other, we'd get back together. He was insecure, so I gave him what he wanted. It's been 3 years. My trial period is over." She paused, and her voice held a faint, yet unmistakable, trace of anticipation. "It's time for him to come back." Julian felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. A chilling cold spread through him, so intense that his fingertips began to tremble. Their 3 years of intimacy, the countless moments he thought were filled with mutual affection, had they all been nothing but an experiment for her? A test run? But what about Julian? With his temper, he's a damn firecracker. If he finds out... Crash! Before the sentence could be finished, Julian slammed the heavy door open. Everyone inside jumped, their heads snapping toward the entrance. Julian stood there, his face a ghostly white, his handsome eyes blazing with a red so deep it looked like they were about to bleed. He saw no one else. His gaze was nailed to the woman sitting in the center of the room. Isabel, poised and elegant in a form-fitting dress, her back ramrod straight. She showed no surprise, no panic at his sudden appearance. She was the same as ever, a woman who could watch the world burn and not so much as blink. And it was precisely that composure that felt like the final handful of salt poured into his gaping wound. Because if she had even an ounce of affection for him, she couldn't, be reacting like this. He walked toward her, his eyes tracing the face he had loved for 3 years. His voice was a raw, ragged thing. "Isabel, don't you have anything to say to me?" Isabel met his gaze, her own perfectly calm. "There's nothing to say. You heard it all. We were bed partners. I always thought you were clear on that. Leo made a bet with you. Win me over, and his collection of supercars was yours for the taking. If you feel the cars aren't enough." Her long, slender fingers retrieved a black credit card from her purse and slid it across the coffee table toward him. "There's $100 million on this. Consider it payment for being on call for the last 3 years. As of now, we're finished." With that, she stood, preparing to leave. But as she passed him, Julian's hand shot out, his fingers clamping around her wrist like a vice. His hand was ice cold, his knuckles white from the force of his grip. Isabel paused, and then she heard him, this proud, arrogant man, as if he were using every last ounce of his strength to cling to her, his voice shattering, but every word clear in the silent room. But I fell in love. Isabel, I fell in love with you. He didn't even know when it happened. Maybe it was the time he was too lazy to put on slippers in the winter, and she had knelt, her delicate hand cupping his cold ankle as she slipped them on for him. Maybe it was when he'd had his appendix out, delirious with pain, and the first thing he saw upon waking was her, sitting by his bedside, the faint blue shadows of exhaustion under her eyes. Maybe it was in the countless nights she came home late from a function, smelling faintly of wine, but still remembered he hated thunderstorms and would curl into his arms. One drop at a time, small and ordinary, they had gathered into a tidal wave that had completely drowned him. And now, she was telling him he was just a bed partner? Isabel, how could you be so cruel? Isabel's lips parted, about to speak, but her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. The screen lit up, and a new text message preview seared itself into Julian's eyes. Isabel, it's been 3 years. I tried. I still only love you. Let's get back together. In that instant, Julian's world imploded. Isabel's gaze lingered on the screen for a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she pried Julian's fingers from her wrist. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't. And with that, she turned and walked away without a backward glance. I didn't fall in love. So for 3 years, he was the only one. The fool who had thrown his entire heart into a play she had directed. Julian stood frozen, staring at his empty hand. The warmth of her skin still lingered, now searing him like a brand. The next second, he snatched a bottle of expensive whiskey from the table and hurled it against the floor. Everything in his line of sight, glasses, fruit bowls, decorations, anything he could destroy became a casualty of his agony. The others in the room were terrified, no one daring to intervene. He didn't know how long it was before his strength gave out. His eyes were empty, bloodshot, but a low, broken laugh escaped his lips. He had no idea how he got out of the club. The night air hit his face cold and wet. He wiped away a smear of tears and hailed cab. Follow that Maybach. He had to see him. He had to see the man she had held in her heart for 3 years, the man he had never stood a chance against. The driver, seeing the state he was in, didn't ask questions and hit the gas. Isabel, who was always so composed, so steady behind the wheel, was driving noticeably faster. Was she that desperate to see him? The car finally stopped at the arrivals terminal of JFK Airport. Julian paid, stumbled out, and hid behind a concrete pillar. He watched Isabel stand at the exit, and then a man in a crisp white shirt, radiating a gentle, refined air, walked out, pulling a suitcase. When Julian saw the man's face, he felt another lightning bolt strike him down. It wasn't just because the moment Isabel saw him, she threw her arms around him and tilted her head up to kiss his chin, a gesture of such heart-melting tenderness. It was because the man she cherished so deeply, the one that got away, was Nathan Hayes, his supposed older brother. The person in this world he despised the most, the one he wanted nothing to do with. Years ago, less than 6 months after his mother's death in a car accident, his father, Arthur Vance, had brought a woman home. And that woman had a son, 3 years his senior. Nathan. Arthur had explained that the woman, Eleanor, was his first love, and Nathan was his biological son. He claimed that if Julian's mother hadn't forcefully taken him, he never would have let his pregnant first love leave him. How absurd. How laughable. Julian knew the truth better than anyone. Back when Arthur was starting his business, he was desperate for capital, so broke he could barely afford to eat. He was the one who sought out Julian's mother, who had been pursuing him for years, and promised to marry her if her family invested in his company. His mother gave him the capital. She gave him all of her love. She even gave him her life, pushing him out of the way in the car crash that killed her. And what was the result? Before her body was even cold, Arthur Vance used his mother's dowry and inheritance to grandly marry his so-called first love, Eleanor Hayes. Isabel. She could have loved anyone. Why did it have to be Nathan? Julian bit his lip so hard he tasted blood, but he was too numb to notice. Before he could process it, Isabel had taken Nathan's suitcase, and they were walking hand in hand toward the parking garage. As if possessed, Julian hailed another taxi and continued to follow them. He was close enough to see through the window of the car in front. He saw Isabel turn her head, her expression soft as she spoke to Nathan. He even saw her reach out, a gesture of casual intimacy, and gently brush a stray strand of hair from Nathan's temple. That kind of delicate, intimate care was something he had never once received in his 3 years with her. His heart felt like it was being ground to dust, the pain so intense he could hardly breathe. As he stared ahead, his vision blurring with unshed tears, the intersection before them erupted in chaos. A screech of tires was followed by the sickening crunch of metal. The taxi Julian was in rear-ended the car in front of it, and an instant later, they were slammed from behind. Boom! The force of the impact threw him forward. His forehead smashed against the headrest in front of him, a searing pain exploding through his skull as warm liquid streamed down his face, blurring his vision. Amid the chaos and screams, he looked through the shattered windshield and saw the door of the familiar Maybach open. Isabel got out first, hurrying around to the passenger side to carefully help Nathan out. She held him close, her brow furrowed in deep concern as she checked him for injuries. She took Nathan's hand, ready to leave the scene of the accident, when her gaze inadvertently met Julian's, trapped, bloody, and broken in the mangled back seat of the taxi. For a fleeting moment, he saw a flicker of clear shock in her usually placid eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Nathan seemed to notice her hesitation. "Isabel, what is it? Do you see someone you know?" "I'm fine, just a scratch. If it's a friend, you should go check on them. I heard one of the taxis was hit pretty bad." After a few seconds of silence, Isabel pulled her gaze away. "No one I know. Just irrelevant people." With that, she turned and, holding Nathan's hand, walked away from the wreckage without a backward glance. Julian watched her retreating figure, a bitter laugh trying to escape his lips, but it was choked off by tears that mixed with the blood streaming down his face. Irrelevant people, so that's all he had ever been to her. After 3 years, just an irrelevant stranger. When he woke up, he was in a hospital. A nurse was adjusting the foredrip in his hand. "Mr. Vance, you're finally awake," she said. "Your injuries are quite serious. You'll need to stay for observation. We also need to contact your family to take care of the medical bills." Julian stared blankly at the ceiling, unresponsive. The nurse repeated herself. "Mr. Vance, I've already paid the bills." A cool, female voice, so familiar it made his heart clench, sounded from the doorway. Julian's head snapped to the side. Isabel was standing there, a vision of elegance in a black dress. The nurse, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself. Isabel walked in, her eyes sweeping over his bandaged head before she reached out, as if to touch his forehead. Julian jerked his head away. "Ms. Sterling, you're a busy woman. Why waste your time visiting an irrelevant person?" Isabel's hand froze mid-air. "If I didn't come, who else would you have?" Her words were a razor-sharp blade, striking the deepest, most painful part of his soul. It was true. Who else did he have? His mother was dead. His father, Arthur, was hopelessly biased. His stepmother, Eleanor, was a hypocrite. That house hadn't been a home for years. All he had was his arrogance and rebellion, a shield to pretend he didn't need anyone, didn't care about anything. For 3 years, it was Isabel who had appeared whenever he needed someone, who had let him grow accustomed to depending on her, who had tricked him into believing he'd found a safe harbor. And now, she was the one who had personally shoved him back into the abyss. The pain in Julian's heart had turned to a cold numbness. "Even if no one came, I wouldn't need you. You're the one who said we're finished. I'm not that pathetic, Ms. Sterling. I'm not going to keep groveling after you've made it clear you don't want me." He took a deep breath, clinging to his last shred of pride, and lashed out with cruel words. "You didn't actually think I was serious when I said I'd fallen for you, did you? I was just messing around. You saw me as a bed partner, and I saw you as a diversion. The sex was mediocre, anyway. Once I'm out of here, I'll find someone better, someone younger." Isabel watched him, his attempt at ferocity undermined by the redness rimming his eyes. Her brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. Just then, a nurse hurried in. "Ms. Sterling, Mr. Hayes is done with his tests. He's been asking for you." Julian reacted like a cornered animal. Go be with your perfect man. I don't need you here." Isabel looked at him in silence for a few moments before finally speaking, her tone detached. "I'm not here for you because of anything else. You're Leo's friend. He asked me to look after you." Julian finally broke. He laughed, his body shaking so hard it sent waves of pain through his injuries, but none of it compared to the agony in his chest. "Don't worry, Isabel." He stopped laughing, his face lifting, his eyes a fractured, icy landscape. "I'm not delusional enough to think otherwise." Isabel's chest felt a slight tremor. Something flickered in her deep eyes, so fast he couldn't catch it. This was the first time she had ever seen Julian cry. Even in bed, when she had pushed him to his limits, he would only get a flush around his eyes, biting his lip, refusing to let a single tear fall. Now, Seeing the clear tear tracks on his face, her frown deepened. Her lips parted as if to say something, but in the end, she said nothing. She turned and followed the nurse out of the room. Watching her leave without a second thought, Julian finally collapsed back onto the bed, letting silent tears soak into the pillow. He thought the pain would last forever, but strangely, the tears ran dry quickly. All that remained was a dead, hollow cold. For the next few days, he was alone in the hospital, taking care of himself. The pain from changing his dressings made him break out in a cold sweat. Food tasted like ash in his mouth. Occasionally, he would overhear the nurses whispering in the hallway about how lucky Mr. Hayes in the VIP suite was. How Ms. Sterling was so attentive, personally feeding him, staying with him through the night, treating him like a fragile piece of treasure. Once, as he passed that room, he glanced through the partially open door. He saw Isabel sitting by the bed, peeling an apple, while Nathan sat beside her, smiling gently. The image was a white-hot nail driven into his eyes, the pain so sharp his vision went dark and his heart seized in a series of agonizing spasms. But he didn't cry. If Julian Vance had one strength, it was that he knew how to love and how to let go. From this day forward, he would never shed another tear for Isabel Sterling. The first thing he did after being discharged was apply for a visa. He couldn't stand to be in this city for one more second. After getting the visa, he went home. The moment he walked in, he ran into his perfectly made-up stepmother, Eleanor Hayes. She saw him and immediately launched into her usual lecture. "Julian, so you finally decided to come home? Where have you been for days? Staying out all night? What kind of behavior is that?" Julian didn't even look at her. He grabbed a tall porcelain vase from the entryway and smashed it on the floor. With a deafening crash, shards flew everywhere. Eleanor shrieked and stumbled back. Julian looked at her calmly, his handsome face a mask of ice and scorn. "Who the hell do you think you are? A homewrecker who destroyed a family has the audacity to lecture the legitimate son? Eleanor, remember this. As long as I, Julian Vance, am in this house, you will never hold your head high." His words were sharp, each one a dagger to the heart. Eleanor turned pale, her body trembling with rage. "Julian, what is wrong with you now?" His father, Arthur Vance, rushed out of his study. He steadied the swaying Eleanor and glared at his son. "You come back and turn the house upside down. Can't you be a little more sensible?" Julian watched his father shield that woman, his heart already frozen solid, leaving only endless contempt. He sneered. "I'm the one turning the house upside down. Fine, give me my share of the inheritance now, and I'll leave the country. I won't come back to bother you ever again." Arthur was taken aback, then plastered a fake look of concern on his face. "What are you talking about? Leave the country? You're a Vance. Why would you go anywhere? Stay here. This will always be your home. We're family." "A family?" Julian laughed as if he'd heard the world's greatest joke. "Stop acting, Arthur. You, her, and Nathan, you're the family. My mother is dead. I don't have a home. Just name your price. I want what's mine." Arthur's expression soured. After a long silence, he said with false sincerity, "I know you have resentment toward the family. How about this? I'll give you $5 million to go clear your head." $5 million? Julian scoffed. "Arthur Vance, you are where you are today because of my maternal grandfather's money, because of the dowry my mother brought. Your very life was saved by my mother sacrificing her own, and now you're using my mother's money to support this mistress and your illegitimate son, living in the house my mother bought, and you think you could dismiss her own son with $5 million? Have you no shame?" Arthur, his weak spot exposed, flew into a rage. How much do you want? Just say it." Julian was prepared. He pulled a file from his bag and calmly listed a series of numbers and stock titles. "You're insane. That's impossible." Arthur exploded. "You're trying to gut half of Vance Industries." Julian remained unruffled. He walked to the window and looked down at the garden, his voice light. "You don't agree? Fine. I planted a bomb outside the villa. Either you agree, give me the money, and sign this agreement, or we all die here today. Your choice." Arthur's pupils shrank. He pointed a trembling finger at him. You lunatic." "Yes, I am a lunatic." Julian admitted it without hesitation, his eyes filled with a grim finality. "You all drove me to it." Arthur's face was ashen, his breathing ragged. He stared at Julian, trying to determine if he was bluffing. In the end, the fear of death won. He collapsed onto the sofa, drenched in a cold sweat, and with a trembling hand, signed the asset division agreement Julian had prepared. Now get rid of the bomb," he stammered. Julian picked up the agreement, checked the signature carefully, and a cold, mocking smile spread across his face. "Don't worry. There's no bomb. I was lying. After all, That's how you tricked my mother into marrying you, isn't it? Like father, like son. Arthur finally realized he'd been played. He was so enraged he nearly passed out, pointing at Julian and sputtering, unable to form a coherent word. Julian couldn't be bothered to look at him anymore and turned to go upstairs. Stop! Arthur, gasping for breath, called after him, forcing down his anger. Your brother is bringing his girlfriend home for dinner tonight. I don't care how you've acted before, but tonight you will sit through this meal properly. He emphasized his words with a clear warning. His girlfriend is Isabel Sterling. You know what the Sterling family means in this city. We can't afford to offend them. You will lose that rebellious attitude and not cause any trouble for me. Julian's steps faltered on the stairs, his back instantly rigid. Isabel. She was coming here tonight. As Nathan's girlfriend? The next moment, the front door opened. Nathan walked in with Isabel on his arm, his face beaming. Dad, Mom, I'm home. Arthur and Eleanor, who had just recovered, immediately put on warm, welcoming smiles. They fussed over Nathan and were deferential and sycophantic toward Isabel. Only Isabel's gaze, when it fell on Julian, was accompanied by a slight frown. It seemed she was only just now realizing that Julian was Nathan's brother. At dinner, they sat a long dining table, Nathan and Isabel naturally on one side, Julian alone on the other. Throughout the meal, Julian watched as Isabel meticulously served Nathan peeled shrimp for him, and when a bit of sauce touched the corner of his mouth, she naturally picked up a napkin and wiped it for him. Eleanor beamed at the scene. Nathan, dear, how did you and Ms. Sterling meet? Tell your mother. A smile touched Nathan's lips. It was at a charity gala, he said softly. I saw a stray cat stuck in a tree and wanted to help it. I nearly fell, but Isabel caught me. After that, she asked for my number. He glanced at Isabel with a smile as he spoke. Julian couldn't help but let out a sneer. Nathan had hated small animals since he was a child. He had even tortured Julian's kitten to death once. He would never voluntarily rescue a cat. It was either a calculated act he'd set up, or he'd intended to capture it for some other cruel purpose. His scornful laugh was jarringly loud in the quiet dining room. Everyone looked at him. Nathan's expression shifted slightly before he smiled again. Julian, what about you? Have you dated anyone these past few years? When are you going to bring a girlfriend home for us to meet? Julian's lips curved into a wild, arrogant grin. Bring one home? Can't do that. Nathan was confused. Why not? Julian's smile widened, his gaze sweeping meaningfully over Isabel before landing back on Nathan. His tone was flippant. Because there are too many. Unlike you, I'm not so lacking in charm that it takes me 3 years to bring one person home. Me, he drew out the word, playing the part of a carefree playboy. The line of women waiting to climb into my bed could stretch from this mansion all the way to Paris. It's really impossible to choose just one to bring back. Julian, Arthur's face turned livid as he slammed his hand on the table. Eleanor was so angry her chest heaved. Nathan, on the other hand, looked aggrieved, his eyes reddening as he glanced at Isabel. Isabel put down her chopsticks, wiped her hands with a napkin, and then, under everyone's gaze, she reached out and covered Nathan's hand on the table with her own. Nathan doesn't need to compare his charm with anyone. In my heart, no one compares to him. He is the best, second to none. Her words were a final verdict, casting Julian into an endless abyss. Nathan squeezed her hand, his face glowing with happiness and triumph. Julian stared at their joined hands, his heart feeling as if it had been instantly crushed, the pain so intense he could barely maintain the arrogant mask on his face. After dinner, the family of 4 sat in the living room, chatting happily. Julian had no interest in playing a part in their happy family charade and went out to the garden. The evening breeze was cool, but it couldn't dissipate the suffocation in his chest. It wasn't long before Nathan followed him out, a magnanimous, piercing smile of a victor on his face. Julian, all alone out here in the wind? His voice was gentle, but his tone was laced with undisguised provocation. Actually, I know why you're angry. People in our circle told me all about you and Isabel's 3-year arrangement. Julian's body tensed slightly, but he kept his back to him. To be honest, when I first heard, I was a little worried, Nathan said, moving to his side, studying his pale, sharp profile. After all, my little brother is so handsome. What woman wouldn't be tempted? What a pity, though. All that beauty for nothing. Your mother couldn't win against my mother, and you can't win against me. These past 3 years were nothing more than a gift I bestowed upon you. Now that the rightful owner is back, it's time for you, the counterfeit, to make your exit. Julian slowly turned. In the moonlight, his eyes shone with a startling brightness, devoid of the anger or sorrow Nathan had expected. There was only a cold, biting mockery. Bestowed. His lips curled. Nathan, Have you been abroad so long you've forgotten what you are? An illegitimate son who only got into this house because his mother was a mistress. A pathetic worm who can only hold onto a woman through scheming. You have the audacity to speak to me of bestowing anything. Your mother picks up the trash my mother didn't want, and you pick up the woman I cast aside. You two are truly mother and son, specializing in taking other people's leftovers. Yep. The smile on Nathan's face froze, his expression turning a sickly green. He hadn't expected Julian to still have such a sharp tongue, even when he was beaten down. What about me? Julian stepped closer, his presence overpowering. You think you've won? You picked up a woman that Julian Vance, was done with, a woman I threw away, and now you're parading her around like a trophy. Nathan, that's about as high as you'll ever aim. Nathan trembled with rage from the verbal assault, his carefully maintained, gentle facade shattering completely. Julian, however, was done wasting his breath. He turned to leave. The moment he turned, a piercing scream came from behind him. Nathan had slammed his forehead against the sharp edge of a decorative stone bench in the garden, and blood instantly gushed from the wound. Nathan! Almost simultaneously, Isabel, Arthur, and Eleanor rushed out from the living room. Nathan lay on the ground, clutching his bleeding forehead, his eyes welling with tears. Dad, Mom, Isabel, it's not Julian's fault. I just lost my balance. Eleanor immediately rushed to her son's side, wailing dramatically. Nathan, my boy, why are you so foolish? He treats you like this, and you still defend him. Arthur's face was ashen with fury. He pointed at Julian, livid. Julian, you ungrateful monster. What did you do to your brother? Julian stood where he was, watching the meticulously staged frame up with a heart as cold as ice. His gaze swept over his furious father and his hypocritical stepmother, finally settling on Isabel. She was kneeling beside Nathan, carefully examining his wound. Then she looked up, her deep eyes fixed on him. The usual calm was gone, replaced by a piercing, accusatory glare. In that moment, a chill seeped into his very bones. She didn't believe him either. Of course, Nathan was the one she cherished. Why would she ever believe him? Julian's lips twitched into a sudden, mirthless smile. The next second, he walked over, and under everyone's stunned gaze, he picked up a heavy ceramic planter and, without hesitation, smashed it down on the exact spot on Nathan's head that was already bleeding. Crack! A dull thud, followed by Nathan's even more blood-curdling scream and a sharp intake of breath from the onlookers. Listen carefully, Julian said, dropping the shattered planter, his voice terrifyingly calm, his eyes like poisoned daggers. I didn't do it the first time, but I did it now. Everyone was stunned, including Isabel. Julian tossed aside the ceramic shard in his hand and turned to leave, but a powerful grip suddenly seized his wrist. Isabel was holding him, her face so dark it looked like a storm cloud. She looked at Arthur, her voice as cold as ice. Mr. Vance, if your son's behavior is not properly disciplined, I'm afraid I won't let this matter rest. Arthur, torn between his affection for Nathan and fearing Isabel's power, quickly bowed. Rest assured, Ms. Sterling, I will teach this insolent brat a lesson. He immediately called for the bodyguards. Seize him, drag him to the study, and make him kneel. You dare. Julian struggled, glaring ferociously at his own father. Arthur looked to Isabel, asking obsequiously, Ms. Sterling, what do you think? Making him kneel and reflect in the study, is that punishment? Isabel helped the bleeding Nathan to his feet, her icy gaze sweeping over Julian. Her lips parted, and the words she spoke were brutally cruel. That's too light. I just saw that horsewhip hanging in the study. I doubt it's just for decoration. With that, she supported Nathan and strode away without looking back. Julian stood as if struck by lightning, watching her retreating back in disbelief. She was actually suggesting that Arthur whip him? Arthur immediately understood. He roared at the bodyguards. Did you hear that? Give him 30 lashes first, then drag him to the study to kneel. He's not to get up without my permission. Let go of me. Arthur Vance, you're not my father. You're an animal. Julian fought desperately, but was pinned down by the bodyguards. He was dragged into a side hall. Eleanor held the tough horsewhip, her face a mask of sadistic pleasure. You little bastard, just as ungrateful as your dead mother. Today, I'll teach you a lesson on your father's behalf. With that, she raised the whip and brought it down hard on Julian's back. Crack! The searing pain of flesh splitting open made his vision go black. He bit down hard on his lip to keep from screaming. 1 lash, 2, 3. Eleanor seemed to be venting years of pent-up resentment, each strike filled with a vicious force, as if trying to tear the flesh from his bones. Julian's body convulsed in agony, his clothes soaked with cold sweat. His consciousness began to fade. He suddenly remembered how Isabel, vaguely aware of his poor relationship with his stepmother, had once asked with a frown, "Do you need me to handle it for you?" He remembered the time he was in a dark mood and had secretly gone to his mother's grave in the middle of the night, and she had somehow found him, wrapping her own coat around him in the pouring rain and driving him home without a word. He remembered all the fleeting moments he had mistaken for concern. Back then, could she ever have imagined that one day she would be the one to personally push him into this hell? Cough! A sweet metallic taste filled his throat. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, but let out a low laugh. The sound of his laughter unnerved Eleanor, enraging her further. "What are you laughing at? You little bastard." Julian lifted his face, slick with sweat and blood, his eyes staring at her like a cornered wolf. He spat out each word. "I'm laughing at you. Both of you. Destined to spend your lives picking up other people's garbage. You." Eleanor trembled with fury. She threw down the whip and yelled at a nearby servant, "Go. Give me the stun gun." "Ma'am, you can't. You'll kill him," an old housekeeper cried out, trying to intervene. "Get out my way. This is not your place to speak." Eleanor shoved her aside, snatched the stun gun from a bodyguard, and pressed it against Julian's body, pulling the trigger. Arg! An excruciating jolt of electricity and impact tore through him. He distinctly heard the crack of his own ribs breaking. He coughed up a great mouthful of blood, and then everything went black. When he regained consciousness, Julian found himself on his bed in his own room, his body aching as if it had been crushed. The housekeeper, Maria, was secretly applying medicine, wiping tears from her eyes as she whispered, "Young master, just apologize to your father. Why must you suffer like this?" Julian weakly shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Apologize? Apologizing to this family will only get you devoured, bones and all." He paused, forcing a smile that was more painful than a grimace. "It was just a beating. I split Nathan's head open, too. It's a fair trade. I can take it." He then struggled to pull a bank card from under his pillow and pressed it into Maria's hand. "Maria, take this." Maria was startled and tried to refuse. "Young master, I can't. I could never take your money." "Take it." Julian's tone was firm. "This is something I prepared a while ago. I'm going abroad. I probably won't be coming back. You came with my mother from her family home. Now, they won't treat you well here. This money is enough for you to live out your years comfortably. Listen to me. Quit and leave this place." Maria looked at the thin card in her hand, then at the bruised and battered young man on the bed who was still thinking of her. She could no longer hold back her tears. They streamed down her face as she dropped to her knees. Julian quickly stopped her, his voice weak. "Maria, I'm kind of craving the chicken noodle soup you make." Yes. I'll go make it right now. Right now." Maria wiped her tears and hurried to the kitchen. The room fell silent again. Julian stared at the ornate but cold ceiling, slowly closing his eyes, letting despair and sorrow consume him. For the next few days, Julian stayed in his room, recovering. He endured the intense pain, slowly packing his belongings. He also gathered everything Isabel had ever given him. She may not have loved him, but she had been generous. The items together were worth nearly $100 million. He'd initially planned to throw them away, but on second thought, he called the owner of the high-end club he frequented. He'd heard they were hosting a charity auction and said he had a number of items to contribute. The owner quickly replied that there was an event that very night and told him to come by. That evening, Julian took several large boxes to the club. After handing the items over to the auction manager, he turned around and ran straight into Isabel and Nathan, who had just arrived together. Nathan, standing beside Isabel, shot Julian a look of triumph and provocation. Julian's fingers instinctively dug into his palms, but he quickly relaxed them. He had business to attend to tonight. There was no need to waste his energy on them. Isabel's gaze seemed to linger for a moment on his unusually pale face before she looked away with indifference. Just as he sat down, the lights dimmed. A host came on stage and excitedly announced a 3-minute kissing game before the auction began, inviting all the couples present to enjoy the moment. Julian froze. A spotlight swept randomly through the dim hall, illuminating couples embracing and kissing. He instinctively turned and saw, not far away, Nathan smiling as he wrapped an arm around Isabel's waist. Isabel looked back at him, the corner of her lips seeming to curve up almost imperceptibly. Then, she stood on her toes and kissed him. In that instant, Julian's heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Countless memories of his own kisses with Isabel flooded his mind. Passionate, fleeting, lustful, but it seemed never one so tender, so full of cherished meaning. Just then, a portly woman with disheveled hair lunged at him. "Mr. Vance, are you alone? I'll be happy to keep you company." Julian recoiled sharply. "Get away from me." But the woman was strong. Just as she was about to grab him, the lights flickered and went out again. He heard the sound of the woman being kicked to the ground, and then she was swiftly dragged away. Julian's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the person who had intervened. It was Isabel's personal bodyguard. He instinctively looked toward Isabel. In the darkness, he couldn't make out her expression, only that she was still nestled close to Nathan. When the lights came back on, she looked perfectly composed, as if nothing had happened. A tremor went through Julian. It was immediately followed by a wave of immense irony. Where's she playing at? Protecting her precious old flame with one hand while helping him with the other. Wasn't that ridiculous? Before he could dwell on it, the auction officially began. The first item up for bid was the large collection of gifts from Isabel that Julian had donated. The starting price was set at a staggering $100 million. The entire hall erupted in murmurs. Isabel's eyes sharpened instantly. She narrowed her gaze in Julian's direction, clearly recognizing the items. Anyone who knew her could see this was a sign of her anger. Julian, however, met her gaze without flinching, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. Bids started coming in. Nathan tugged on Isabel's sleeve and whispered, "Isabel, that blue diamond is beautiful. I really like it." Isabel was silent for a few seconds before finally raising her paddle. In the end, the collection was sold for a heavenly price of $1 billion to Isabel, who then turned and presented it all to a beaming Nathan. The irony was not lost on Julian. In a way, wasn't this just another form of returning property to its original owner? During the intermission, he went to the restroom. As he came out, he saw Isabel leaning against the hallway wall, smoking. The hazy smoke blurred her sharp features, but couldn't hide the heavy gaze she fixed on him. Julian intended to walk past without a word, but she grabbed his wrist. "Why did you auction those things?" Julian didn't answer, instead looking up at her with a scornful tone. "Why did you help me out just now?" Isabel's brow furrowed slightly as she was about to speak. But Julian cut her off. "Let me guess, because I'm Leo's friend? And he asked you to look after me." He stepped closer, looking down at her cold, beautiful face, his lips curling into an icy sneer. "Can he also ask you to look after my love life, Miss Sterling?" Isabel pressed her temples, looking weary. Finally, she just said, "Julian, you're always like a hedgehog covered in spikes. What good does that do you?" Good. It did him no good. But if he wasn't a hedgehog, he would have been devoured by that family, by her beloved Nathan, until not even his bones were left. He was about to retort when Isabel continued, "I was your last girlfriend. Your next one can't be a step down. That trash just now isn't worthy of you. If you're in need of a woman, I can introduce you to some." Julian stared at her, stunned, and then burst out laughing so hard that tears came to his eyes. Who did she think she was? After stabbing him in the heart, she now had the audacity to dictate his choice in partners? Was it possessiveness, or was she just worried he would tarnish her esteemed reputation? "Isabel," he choked out, his eyes icy and broken. "My business is none of your business. You don't need to concern yourself with me." As for women, his tone turned flippant, a self-destructive mockery. "I can have as many as I want. I'm leaving soon. You won't be able to control me anymore." Isabel seized on his words, her voice hardening. "What do you mean you're leaving? Where are you going?" Julian said nothing, yanking his arm free and turning away. Back in his seat, all he wanted was to leave this place. However, when the next auction item was presented, Julian's gaze froze. It was a sapphire necklace, classic and elegant in style. It was his mother's most cherished possession, her final legacy. He shot a look at Nathan and met his triumphant gaze. He understood instantly. It had to be his father, Arthur, who had secretly given his mother's things to Nathan, and now Nathan was publicly auctioning it off. Julian had no choice but to sit back down, forcing himself to remain calm and join the bidding. He couldn't let his mother's memory fall into someone else's hands. After several rounds of fierce bidding, Julian finally won the necklace at a price several times its market value. He let out a sigh of relief and was about to go claim it when Nathan suddenly stood up. "Wait a moment," Nathan said, his voice soft but dripping with unmistakable malice. "Mr. Auctioneer, my apologies. I seem to have brought the wrong item. I've decided not to auction this necklace after all. It's a personal treasure of mine that got mixed in by mistake." With that, he took the necklace, gave Julian a victorious smile, and turned to walk out. Julian immediately chased after him, stopping him outside the club. "Nathan, give me back the necklace. Name your price. I'll give you whatever you want." Julian said desperately. Nathan toyed with the necklace, a cruel smile on his face. I don't need money. He walked over to a nearby ornamental lake, looked at the murky water, and then turned back to Julian. You're the one who's so obsessed with being clean, so proud, aren't you? If you want it, you can go get it yourself. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the necklace into the lake. Without a moment's hesitation, under the shocked stares of the onlookers, Julian dove into the frigid water. He searched frantically in the murky depths, the sludge staining his expensive suit and his pale, handsome face. Isabel came out from her smoke break to see this exact scene. Her brow tightened. She strode to the edge of the lake and held out her hand, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Julian, get out. Julian shook off her hand and continued his desperate search. Finally, his fingertips brushed against something cold and hard. He grasped it like a lifeline and crawled out of the lake, soaking wet. Only then did Isabel see that what he was willing to risk his life for was just a small, somewhat old-fashioned sapphire necklace. A strange anger flared within her. She grabbed his arm. You donate items worth millions without a second thought, and now you're willing to die for this cheap trinket? Julian violently shook her off, his body trembling from cold and emotion. You don't understand anything. Stop acting like you have the right to judge me. You're the one who said we're finished. Then do me a favor and leave me alone. Stop paying attention to me, and stop talking to me. Ever again, he stared into her eyes, enunciating each word with venom. Sister-in-law. The title made Isabel flinch as if she'd been struck. Her pupils contracted. Before she could speak, Nathan walked over, his tone innocent yet triumphant. Julian, thank you for retrieving my property for me. He reached for the necklace clutched in Julian's hand. Julian held it tight, refusing to let go. It's mine. Nathan looked pleadingly at Isabel. Isabel, my mother gave that to me. Isabel looked at Julian's defiant face, then at Nathan's expectant one. Her brow furrowed, and finally, she reached out and grabbed Julian's wrist with force. Let go. Her voice was hard as steel. No. Julian glared at her, his eyes red. Isabel called for her bodyguards. Using brute force, they pried his clenched fingers open, one by one. Crack. A soft, sickening snap, followed by Julian's pain grunt. His wrist. She had broken his wrist. Excruciating pain shot up his arm. His face went ashen, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he stared in disbelief at the cold, cruel woman before him. Nathan seized the opportunity to take the necklace. He shot Julian a triumphant glance, then put his arm around Isabel's shoulder. Isabel, let's go get our coats and leave. Isabel nodded. She gave the crumpled, pain-racked Julian a complicated look before turning to leave with Nathan. However, just as they stepped back into the club, a heavy, wrought iron chandelier hanging overhead suddenly came loose and plummeted directly toward Nathan. Isabel reacted with lightning speed, shoving Nathan out of the way, but the edge of the fixture still grazed the back of his head. Nathan! Isabel's face changed drastically. She immediately helped him up and rushed him to the parking garage to get to the hospital. Julian, clutching his broken wrist, was on the verge of passing out from the pain. A kind bystander helped him to the hospital as well. The doctor setting his wrist bone couldn't help but remark, my God, who could be so ruthless to do this to someone? Julian's face was pale, his lips trembling. The pain in his heart far surpassed the physical agony. The doctor told him the injury was severe and he would need to be hospitalized for a few days. So, Julian was admitted. However, he had barely settled into his room when Isabel burst in, radiating a chilling fury. Her face was dark, her eyes burning with a look that could kill. Julian, I checked the security footage. You bribed a staff member at the club to loosen that light fixture. You were trying to kill Nathan, weren't you? The accusation was so absurd, Julian could only stare at her coldly. I did not. Who else would have such malice toward him? Julian, I really underestimated you. You're completely lawless, capable of anything. I said I didn't do it. You have no right to slander me. Slander? Isabel's eyes were like chips of ice. It seems you won't tell the truth until you've been taught a lesson. She took out her phone, dialed a number, and spoke into it with cold command. Contact the DA's office. Julian Vance, suspected of aggravated assault. Send someone over. Let him spend a few days in a cell to clear his head. Isabel. Julian stared at her in horror, unable to believe she would use her connections to have him locked up. But no matter how he struggled or explained, it was useless. Soon, uniformed officers arrived at his room. Ignoring the doctor's protests and his injuries, they forcibly took him away. The next few days were hell on earth for Julian. The once arrogant prince was subjected to endless torment. The other inmates seemed to have been given special instructions, bullying him relentlessly. He was beaten and kicked, his injured wrist maliciously stomped on again and again until the bones were ground to splinters. When he was finally released, he was barely human, covered in injuries, a ghost of his former self. The only thing that kept him going, that helped him crawl out of that hell, was a single text message he had just received. His visa had been approved. He took a cab back to the mansion to grab his luggage and head to the airport. But as he walked in, he ran into his best friend, Leo Sterling, who had just returned from a trip around the world and had been filled in on everything. When Leo saw the state Julian was in, his eyes instantly reddened. He couldn't stop apologizing. "Julian, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. I never liked my sister's ex, and I knew she was still hung up on him, so I dared you to go after her as a distraction. I never thought it would end like this. I didn't know her old flame was Nathan. If I had known, I would have died before letting you get involved." Julian shook his head, his voice raspy. "It's not your fault. It's all in the past now. I've let it all go. Leo, I'm planning to leave the country. I probably won't be back." Leo was stunned and tried to persuade him to stay. "Julian, don't go. Stay here. I'll take care of you. I'll protect you." "No," Julian said softly. "There's nothing left for me here." Leo saw the dead emptiness in Julian's eyes and knew he couldn't be stopped. With red-rimmed eyes, he helped Julian pack his final things. Before leaving, Julian took one last look at the house that held all his childhood memories, the house that his father had now filled with a mistress and an illegitimate son. He took out the gasoline he had prepared beforehand and, ignoring the servant's pleas, emotionlessly splashed it everywhere. Then he lit a match. Flames shot into the sky, consuming everything from his past. He picked up his last suitcase and turned away without a backward glance. Leo drove him to the airport, apologizing nonstop, offering his entire garage of supercars as compensation. Julian shook his head. He leaned against the window, watching the scenery fly by. "I don't need them," he said softly. "You have to say goodbye to the wrong person before you can meet the right one." He managed a smile, one of post-traumatic relief and exhaustion. "With my looks, if I wanted, the women I meet from now on will only be better, richer, and love me more." Leo quickly agreed. "Damn right. Our Julian is the handsomest. You'll definitely find a good woman who will love you with all her heart." At the airport, Leo hugged him tightly, unwilling to let go. "Julian, you have to live well, so damn well that you can rub it in all their faces." Julian returned the hug, patting his back gently before pulling away. With a casual wave, he turned and walked toward the security checkpoint. Leo watched his figure disappear down the corridor and finally broke down, squatting on the ground and sobbing uncontrollably. After crying for who knows how long, filled with rage and injustice, he dialed Isabel's number. The phone rang for a long time before she answered. "Isabel," Leo's voice was thick with emotion, his tone accusatory. "I know you love Nathan, but Julian was with you for 3 years. He's leaving now. He's never coming back. Can't you even come to see him off?" The other end of the line was dead silent. A few seconds later, Isabel's voice came through, laced with a rare, almost imperceptible tension. "You said, who's leaving?" Leo's hoarse question was like a stone dropped into a frozen lake, sending violent ripples across Isabel's seemingly calm heart. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her knuckles turning white. "Julian, it's Julian. He's gone. He took the first flight out of the country. He said he's never coming back. Are you happy now, Isabel?" Leo practically screamed before slamming down the phone. The dial tone buzzed in her ear. Isabel remained frozen in place, the phone still pressed to her ear. The crystal chandelier in her office cast a cold light on her face, revealing no emotion, but deep within her eyes, something seemed to shatter for an instant before being covered by an even thicker layer of ice. "Gone? Left the country? Never coming back?" The words strung together were like a tiny, sharp icicle that had unexpectedly pierced a hidden corner of her heart, bringing a sharp, unfamiliar pang of pain. But years of being in power had forged a will of steel, and her love for Nathan made her instinctively suppress this unwelcome emotional fluctuation. She frowned, tossed the phone back on her desk, and tried to refocus on the crucial acquisition proposal in front of her. But the dense text and numbers swam before her eyes like a swarm of chaotic ants. Her mind replayed, unbidden, the look in Julian's eyes before he was taken away. Broken, desperate, filled with a burning hatred, yet hiding an unspeakable pain. She let out a frustrated breath and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the city glittered with a vibrant nightlife, but the dazzling lights couldn't illuminate the turmoil in her heart. An unprecedented feeling of losing control was quietly growing, like vines wrapping around her heart. On a strange impulse, she grabbed her car keys and stormed out of the office. As the elevator descended, she made a call to the private line of the airport director, her tone leaving no room for argument. Check which international flight Julian Vance was on. Now, by the time she sped to the airport, running a red light in her haste, the director was already waiting nervously in the international departures hall with the information. Ms. Sterling, Mr. Vance was on flight FX108 to Paris. The plane. It took off 20 minutes ago. Isabel's steps came to an abrupt halt. She looked up at the massive flight information display. Next to flight FX108, 3 cold, green words were displayed. Departed. She stood frozen in the bustling terminal, like a statue suddenly robbed of its soul. The sounds of multilingual announcements, rolling suitcases, and travelers' chatter all seemed to come from behind a thick pane of glass, distant and muffled. For the first time, she truly understood the meaning of missed and out of control. Something important was being forcibly torn from the seamless fabric of her life. Just then, her phone vibrated again. Nathan was flashing on the screen. She took a deep breath and answered. Nathan's low voice came through, filled with a practiced affection. Isabel, my head is still a little dizzy and the wound hurts. I'm scared to be alone in the hospital. Can you come keep me company? Before, hearing his voice like this, she would have dropped everything to rush to his side. But now, looking at the faint light of the plane that had just disappeared into the night sky, she felt a flicker of annoyance, so subtle she barely acknowledged it herself. She was silent for a few seconds before finally agreeing. Okay, I'm on my way. When she arrived at the VIP suite, Nathan was propped up in bed, looking pale. His face lit up when he saw her. Isabel sat by the bed, and Nathan leaned against her, whispering, but her mind was elsewhere. Nathan sensitively picked up on her unusual silence. Isabel, he tested carefully, are you worried about Julian? I heard from Dad that he went abroad. He has a fiery temper, and things did get out of hand this time. Maybe some time away will do him good. He'll probably come back when he's cooled off. Let's not talk about him. Isabel cut him off, her tone flat. Nathan was taken aback, but nodded, a smile in his eyes. What he didn't know was that after he fell asleep, Isabel took out her phone again. Her finger hovered over the screen before she finally opened a chat with her assistant and typed a line. Keep an eye on Julian Vance's activities abroad. I want a weekly report. But just as her fingertip was about to hit send, she paused. What was she doing? Was a former bed partner worth this much of her attention? A strange wave of self-loathing washed over her. She quickly deleted the message, as if to erase the momentary lapse in her judgment. To outsiders, her life, after getting back together with Nathan, was perfect and enviable. They were a well-matched couple from prominent families. Nathan was gentle and doted on her. Isabel fulfilled all the duties of a girlfriend, accompanying him to dinner, driving him to and from work, and attending necessary social events. But only she knew that this seemingly perfect life was hollow, filled with an indescribable boredom and a lack of flavor. She would be signing documents in her office and suddenly find her mind drifting. She would remember how Julian used to sneak in when she was busiest, wrap his arms around her from behind, and playfully nibble on her ear, disrupting her concentration until they were both breathless. She would be on her private jet and find herself instinctively glancing at the small lavatory, remembering the time Julian had audaciously seduced her in there, emerging with his ears flushed red as he wrapped her in a blanket, muttering defiantly. These inappropriate memories surfaced like ghosts at the most unexpected times, irritating her to no end. She dismissed these feelings as simply a matter of not being used to it, a 3-year habit that would take time to break. She took Nathan to the private restaurant they used to frequent, a place that required reservations months in advance. The food was still exquisite, the ambience still elegant. Nathan ate delicately, commenting on which dishes were too cooling for the body and should be eaten in moderation. Isabel ate in silence, inexplicably thinking of Julian. He would always snatch her favorite dish from her bowl when she wasn't looking, his nose turning red from the spice as he gasped for air, yet still insisting it was delicious. He would then drink from her glass to cool his mouth, shamelessly declaring, "What's yours is mine." Those meals had always been chaotic but so full of life. This meal, however, was so quiet that the only sound was the faint clinking of silverware, so dull it was suffocating. At night, she habitually slept on the far side of the bed. In a half-awake state, her arm reached out to the side, only to touch a body that felt soft and uninteresting. Nathan would gently move closer, his scent a carefully chosen, elegant cologne. Wrong. The body heat was wrong. It lacked that vibrant, fiery warmth. The scent was wrong. It lacked that natural, clean smell of soap. Even the soft sound of his breathing was wrong. Julian was a restless sleeper. He would unconsciously hog the blankets and, like a small animal seeking warmth, would wrap his arms and legs around her in his sleep. Isabel's eyes snapped open, a powerful sense of repulsion rising within her. For the first time, she almost roughly pushed Nathan away. She got out of bed, her voice laced with a cold edge. "You go to sleep. I just remembered I have an urgent document to deal with." Ignoring Nathan's stunned and hurt expression, she walked into her study and closed the door. She needed to be alone, to calm down, to banish the increasingly clear image of Julian from her mind. A week later, Isabel attended a major business gala with Nathan. He looked dapper in an expensive suit, his conduct impeccable, earning praise from many in attendance. Everyone thought they were a match made in heaven. But Isabel found the event stifling. The air, thick with the scent of champagne and perfume, made it hard to breathe. During the dinner, a wealthy heir, for some reason, deliberately spilled red wine on Nathan's suit. Nathan's expression immediately changed. He looked pointedly at Isabel, as if he had suffered a great injustice and needed her comfort. Before, Isabel might have thought he had a gentle nature. But now, looking into his eyes, she was inexplicably reminded of Julian. If he had been in this situation, he probably would have paused, raised an eyebrow, and then flashed a defiant, arrogant smile. He might have even retaliated by flinging his own drink back, casually remarking, "Oops, my hand slipped." He would never have shown a hint of weakness in public. That vibrant life force, like a scorching wildfire. The stark contrast startled her, and the crack in a corner of her heart grew wider. Just then, a socialite from a rival family, known for her sharp tongue, sauntered over to their table to offer a toast. She had a new beau on her arm, a young man who bore a slight resemblance to Julian. The woman, clearly tipsy, slurred her words. Well, Ms. Sterling, long time no see. I heard your feisty little boy toy got snatched up and is living it up abroad. TSK, what a shame. I was always hoping I'd get a taste of that young stud myself." Splash. Before she could finish, Isabel, without any warning, grabbed a bottle of wine from a passing waiter and poured the entire contents over the woman's head. The action was swift, precise, and brutal. The socialite, caught completely off guard, let out a shriek. Her hair was plastered to her exquisitely made-up face, a pathetic sight. The entire hall fell into a dead silence. Everyone stared, dumbfounded, at the sudden spectacle. Isabel stood under the lights, calmly smoothing a wrinkle on her sleeve. Her eyes were as cold and dark as a Siberian winter, and the low pressure she emanated seemed to drop the temperature in the room. She looked down at the shrieking woman, her voice low but each word like a blade of ice. "Who the hell do you think you are? You're not worthy of even mentioning his name." With that, she ignored the woman on the floor and the stunned guests. Tossing out a final, "Watch your mouth," she grabbed the equally shocked Nathan and strode out of the hall amidst the eerie silence. This was the first time in her life she had ever lost her composure so completely at such an important public event. And it was all because of a derogatory comment about Julian. The car ride home was tense. Nathan seemed to have been frightened and only spoke after a long while, tentatively suggesting, "Isabel, my mother called again today, asking when we were going to consider getting married. What do you think?" Isabel stared out at the passing city lights, rubbing her temples. Her voice held a note of weariness and evasion she barely concealed. The company has several major international acquisitions at a critical stage right now. It's a busy time. We'll talk about it later. A shadow passed over Nathan's eyes, but he didn't press the issue. Late that night, Isabel was alone in her study. On a whim, she opened an encrypted album on her phone. Inside was a single short video. It was from a party years ago, where someone had dared Julian to sing. He had boldly jumped on stage, grabbed the microphone, and launched into a lively pop song. In the video, he was vibrant and rebellious, his smile as bright as the summer sun. His eyes danced with a lively spirit, a burning flame that instantly lit up the dim, noisy room and, it seemed, had also illuminated her own gray heart at the time. Why had she saved this video? She couldn't remember. Watching the carefree figure on the screen and comparing it to her current stagnant life, Isabel's heart felt as if it were being squeezed by an invisible hand, a suffocating ache spreading through her chest. She abruptly turned off the video, placing the phone face down on the desk, her chest heaving. She refused to delve deeper into the source of this emotion. Time flew by. 3 years had passed in the blink of an eye. At the capital's international airport, Isabel was returning from an important business trip with Nathan, who accompanied her as her fiancé. They traveled discreetly, using the VIP lane to avoid the crowds. However, the moment they stepped out of the private channel, a deafening roar of voices hit them. The arrivals hall was a sea of people. Countless young men and women held up glowing signs, flowers, and posters, chanting a single name in a frenzied, unified chorus. Julian, Julian, Julian. The sound was so powerful it seemed to threaten to blow the roof off the airport. Other travelers stopped to stare, murmuring amongst themselves. Who is that? What's with all the commotion? You don't know? Julian Vance, the biggest star in the world right now. He debuted 3 years ago and was immediately dubbed the man every woman wants to marry. He's gorgeous and a phenomenal actor. Oh my God, I can't believe we're seeing him. I love him. The moment Isabel heard that name, a name etched in her very bones, her feet stopped moving of their own accord. Her eyes instinctively followed the direction of the sound, her gaze sweeping over the crowd until it landed on a massive billboard hanging from a pillar on the opposite side of the hall. On the billboard, a man's face was exquisitely perfect. His features were even more striking than they had been 3 years ago, the boyish arrogance replaced by a confident, composed air forged by time. He was dressed in the latest suit from a top designer, his expression cool and distant, yet commanding a powerful presence that was both breathtaking and intimidating. It was Julian. In that instant, Isabel's heart felt like it had been struck by a sledgehammer. The sudden, dull pain made her breath catch in her throat. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on the enormous poster. All the noise around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the dazzling, star-like figure. Just then, Nathan also saw the billboard. He instinctively tightened his grip on Isabel's shoulder, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and a subtle, sour note. Is that Julian? I'd heard he went abroad and became an actor or something. I didn't realize he was this famous. To think he gave up being a pampered young master to go into a place like Hollywood. Sure, he has a lot of fans now. His voice trailed off, a deliberate attempt to downplay and express his unease. But Isabel didn't seem to hear him. She wasn't completely unaware. Over the past 3 years, though she had never actively sought him out, news about him had always found its way to her through various channels. She knew his debut had been a massive success, that every movie he made was a critical and commercial hit, that he had won numerous prestigious awards. She had even had her assistant secretly buy ticket stubs for all his movies and collect posters and merchandise from his endorsements, hiding them in a secret drawer in her study. She had just never allowed herself to go find him. Her gaze, like a precision radar, cut through the surging crowd, locking onto the figure that had just emerged from the regular arrivals gate, surrounded by bodyguards and assistants. He was even more stunning in person. He wore a simple white shirt and jeans under a camel-colored trench coat. Sunglasses covered much of his face, but couldn't hide his natural star power and effortless charisma. He smiled and waved to the frenzied fans on either side, his gestures elegant yet maintaining a perfect degree of detachment. As Isabel stared, mesmerized from across the hall, a woman in a deep blue dress, curvaceous, glamorous, with a rebellious flair, suddenly broke through the crowd. She held a large, eye-catching bouquet of Ecuadorian roses and went right up to him. It was Sienna Croft, the heiress to the Croft family fortune and a well-known socialite, but also a formidable and capable woman in her own right. Sienna naturally took Julian's carry-on bag from his hand and leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Whatever she said made Julian laugh out loud, a genuine laugh that instantly dispelled the coolness from his face, making him look vibrant and alive. He even reached out and playfully tapped her on the head. The interaction between them was intimate, natural, filled with a chemistry that excluded all others. Watching this, Isabel's face instantly darkened, a storm brewing in her eyes. The pressure around her dropped so suddenly that even Nathan, standing beside her, shivered. They were almost pushed along by the crowd toward the parking garage. By a stroke of coincidence, Isabel's car was parked near Julian's team's conspicuous stretch Lincoln. Isabel watched as Sienna diligently opened the car door for Julian, her hand held protectively over his head to prevent him from hitting it. Just as Julian bent down to get into the car, he seemed to sense something. He suddenly turned his head, his gaze cutting across the distance and colliding directly with Isabel's. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. Isabel's heart leaped in her throat. She could hear the blood roaring in her ears. She saw his eyes behind the sunglasses seem to widen for a split second in surprise. But it was only for a second. The next moment, all emotion drained from those stunningly beautiful eyes, leaving them as placid as a calm lake, and filled with the polite, distant regard one would show a stranger. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in her direction, as if acknowledging an unimportant fan who had recognized him. Then, without another glance, he turned, got into the car, and was gone. Sienna, after closing the door, caught Isabel's eye through the window. She gave a deliberately provocative raise of her eyebrows, a smug smirk playing on her lips, before walking around to the driver's seat and starting the engine. The black-stretched Lincoln roared to life and sped away, disappearing from the airport parking garage. Isabel stood as if rooted to the spot, a chilling cold seeping into her bones. Nathan called her name several times beside her, but she didn't hear him. All that was left was a ringing in her ears and a single, sharp thought echoing in her mind. He had seen her. He had seen her loud and clear, and he had completely, utterly ignored her. Back in a lavish hotel suite, Isabel threw herself onto the sofa. The glittering city skyline outside did nothing to penetrate the darkness that had consumed her. She didn't sleep a wink. The scene at the airport replayed in her mind on a torturous loop. Julian's eyes, seen through his sunglasses, sweeping over her with the indifference one would show a stranger. The infuriatingly natural intimacy between him and Sienna Croft, and Sienna's final, mocking smirk. Every detail was a poisoned needle, stabbing at her nerves, causing waves of unbearable pain and panic. Yes, panic. A feeling she had never experienced before, a sense of losing control, washed over her like an icy tide, silently drowning her. She found she couldn't bear to be looked at that way by him. Even more, she couldn't bear to see another woman by his side, a woman who seemed so perfectly matched with him, who might have already captured his heart. This unfamiliar emotion left her agitated, almost pathetic. She shot up from the sofa, went to the bar, and poured herself a glass of strong liquor, downing it in one gulp. The burning liquid did nothing to extinguish the fire in her heart. She grabbed her phone and dialed her assistant. Her voice, raw from a sleepless night and suppressed rage, was cold and sharp. Immediately, I want Julian Vance's exact address in the city and his complete itinerary for the next week. Also, that's Sienna Croft. What has she been doing for the last 3 years? And what is her relationship with him? I want the most detailed report you can get, and I want it fast. After issuing her commands, she paced the room like a caged animal, waiting. Every second stretched into an eternity. A few hours later, her assistant called back with a detailed and cautious report. Julian's address and schedule were laid out. But the information about Sienna Croft made Isabel's heart sink further and further. Sienna Croft, heiress to a powerful family, was a highly capable woman known for her flamboyant, rebellious personality and her reputation as a socialite. However, 3 years ago, around the time Julian went abroad, she had a sudden change of heart, shifting the focus of her business to Europe and taking up residence in Paris. She had acted as an investor, quietly paving the way for Julian, using her connections and resources to help him quickly establish himself in the fashion and film industries. For 3 years, she had been a constant presence by his side, a guardian angel of sorts. Their relationship was known to be close, and they were publicly good friends, but whether they were romantically involved was a matter of speculation. Good friends? Isabel hung up the phone with a cold sneer, her eyes dark. There is no such thing as a purely platonic friendship between a man and a woman. Sienna's intentions were as clear as day. And Julian, he had allowed a woman like that to get so close. A powerful sense of animosity and an unprecedented feeling of crisis, like a venomous snake, coiled tightly around Isabel's heart. For the first time, she felt a profound hatred for the name Sienna Croft and an emotion she was reluctant to admit to herself called jealousy. She had to see Julian. Desperately. An opportunity presented itself a week later. Her assistant reported that Julian would be attending a post-show party for a top designer brand. Isabel immediately pulled some strings to get an invitation. The party was held at a historic private estate, a glittering affair of high fashion and champagne. The moment Isabel entered, her eyes scanned the room like a radar, quickly locking onto the most dazzling figure in the crowd. Julian was dressed in a royal blue velvet suit that made his fair skin look almost translucent, giving him an air of refined elegance. He was in conversation with several internationally renowned directors and producers, his demeanor graceful and composed, his fluent French and English impeccable. He exuded a confident, powerful aura, a world away from the sometimes reckless, sometimes cautious man he had been in her presence 3 years ago. Isabel held her wine glass, watching him from across the room, her heart clenching tightly. She waited patiently until she saw him, looking a little tired, step out onto a terrace overlooking the gardens for a break. This was her chance. She followed him quietly. The night air on the terrace was cool. Julian was leaning against the railing, gazing at the shimmering lake in the distance, his profile looking cool and solitary in the moonlight. Isabel walked up behind him, so close she could smell the faint, crisp cologne he wore, a scent so different from the one she remembered. She took a deep breath to quell the turmoil inside her, but when she spoke, her voice instinctively took on a tone of condescending interrogation, a habit she wasn't even aware of. "What's going on between you and Sienna Croft?" Julian didn't seem surprised by her presence. He didn't even turn around, just swirled the champagne in his glass, his voice calm and polite, yet distant. "Ms. Sterling, long time no see. Who I'm with doesn't seem to be something I need to report to you." The formal Ms. Sterling and his detached tone were like an icicle to her heart. She stepped closer, so close she could feel the coolness radiating from him, her voice tinged with impatience and a certain cruelty. "Julian, have you lost your sense of judgment after 3 years away? Do you not know what kind of person Sienna Croft is? She's never without a man on her arm. What could she possibly give you?" Julian finally turned around slowly. In the moonlight, his beautiful eyes were slightly upturned, holding not anger or hurt, but a mocking pity. His lips parted, each word clear and sharp. "Ms. Sterling, you're hardly in a position to judge others, are you?" He paused, his gaze sweeping over her tense face, his voice light, but carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. "Sienna may like to play the field, but as it happens, I used to be the most notorious playboy in the city. We're quite a good match. At least," he emphasized, his eyes as sharp as a blade, "Sienna has never denied her feelings for me, and she respects my choices and desires. Unlike some people," his gaze pierced through her, cold and all-knowing, "who have someone else in their heart the entire time, but still use the excuse of trying things out to waste 3 whole years of another person's life. Isabel, who do you think is the more despicable one?" His words were like a series of loud slaps across her face. Her expression turned ugly, her throat feeling as if it were blocked. She opened her mouth, but found she was speechless. A torrent of rage and an indescribable, bitter pain twisted inside her, threatening to tear her apart. Just then, a lazy but clearly annoyed voice cut in. Well, I was wondering where you disappeared to. Turns out you were being cornered by someone irrelevant." Sienna strode over, her long legs carrying her with a natural grace. She reached out and possessively looped her arm through Julian's. She looked at Isabel, a playful smirk on her face, but her eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. "Ms. Sterling, long time no see. What are you and my boyfriend talking about? The atmosphere seems a little tense." Boyfriend. The word was like 3 bombshells exploding in Isabel's ears. Her pupils contracted, and she stared at Julian, her heart seizing so violently it almost stopped beating. She stared at him, a desperate, almost pathetic plea in her eyes, hoping he would deny it, or at least frown. But Julian simply leaned his head slightly towards Sienna, tacitly confirming her statement, without even giving Isabel another glance. Sienna took in Isabel's reaction, a triumphant curve to her lips. Her tone was openly provocative. "I heard you and our Julian have some history, but that's all in the past. Julian has me to take care of him now, and he's doing just fine, so you don't need to worry your pretty little head about him." She paused, her gaze pointedly sweeping over the empty space behind Isabel. "By the way, where is your Mr. Hayes? Didn't bring him along for the fun? You shouldn't neglect him like that. Leave him all alone at home." Without giving Isabel a chance to respond, she turned, still holding Julian's arm, and walked away with a casual, confident air, as if she had just dismissed a minor annoyance. Isabel stood frozen, watching them leave, Julian never once looking back. Her hands, hanging by her sides, were clenched into tight fists, her knuckles turning a frightening white, the veins on the back of her hands bulging. An unprecedented, sharp, piercing jealousy and an uncontrollable rage, like lava, churned and burned in her chest. For the first time, she truly, deeply understood the meaning of the taste of gut-wrenching agony. After the party, the atmosphere around Isabel was dangerously oppressive. Nathan, sensitive to her mood, became even more attentive, trying to soothe her agitation with his gentle demeanor. One evening, he brought a glass of warm milk to her room. He found her standing by the window, her back rigid and solitary. He approached her and spoke softly. "Isabel, have you been too tired lately? Would you like me to give you a head massage? I remember when we first met, I almost fell from a ladder, trying to rescue a little cat from a tree. You steadied me, and that's when we got together. I used to give you massages like this afterward, and you said it felt very comfortable. He tried to evoke the warmth of their romantic first encounter. But as Isabel listened, her frown deepened. For some reason, she was reminded of something an old Vance family housekeeper had once muttered, that young Master Nathan seemed disliked small animals as a child, and had even secretly killed a neighbor's cat. She also recalled Julian's scornful dismissal of the story. At the time, she had paid it no mind, even assuming Julian was just being malicious. But now, the thought planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She calmly pushed Nathan's hand away. No, thank you. I like to be alone. A shadow fell over Nathan's eyes, but he didn't dare press further and retreated from the room. Sometimes, fate turns on a dime. A few days later, Isabel's highly efficient assistant, while organizing a batch of old files from the home office, stumbled upon a copy of an investigation report that had been deliberately buried for years, an analysis of the suspicious circumstances surrounding the car crash that had killed Julian's mother. The report indicated that the crash was no mere accident, but had likely been orchestrated. The primary beneficiary was none other than Arthur Vance, who had swiftly taken control of the Vance Corporation. Almost simultaneously, Isabel's contact inside Vance Industries sent an urgent message. The corporation was a hollow shell. Arthur Vance had been embezzling massive sums of money for years, laundering it through complex offshore transactions. Nathan and his mother, Eleanor, were not only aware, but were deeply involved. The company was now drowning in debt and on the brink of bankruptcy. But the final, devastating blow was a secret audio recording the contact sent next. It was a phone conversation between Nathan and a friend, his voice clear, triumphant, and vicious. If I hadn't deliberately fallen off that ladder while pretending to save that cat, how would I have gotten Isabel to notice me? Women like her, they eat up that whole kindness act. The garden incident was my idea too. I knew she was about to come out, so I timed it perfectly and threw myself against the bench. In the chandelier at the club, I paid someone to loosen it. I was hoping it would hit me harder, make her feel even more sorry for me, and completely despise that little bastard Julian. It only grazed me, but the effect was the same. Who the hell does Julian Vance think he is? He thinks he can compete with me? Isabel has only ever had me in her heart. All it took was a few little tricks, and she believed everything. She even had him locked up for a few days. It was so satisfying. One by one, the truths were laid bare, like a scalpel dissecting the reality Isabel had believed in for years, leaving a bloody mess. The man she thought was kind, pure, and in need of her protection was nothing but an elaborate manipulative fraud. And all the pain she had inflicted on Julian, it was all built on a foundation of these despicable lies. She had been a complete and utter fool, played by this mother and son duo, all while thinking she was protecting true love and upholding her duty. The immense shock and an overwhelming wave of regret, like a tsunami, completely submerged her. She staggered back, collapsing into a chair, her face as white as a sheet, a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. Her heart seized in a series of violent, agonizing spasms, the pain so intense she could hardly breathe. She immediately had Nathan escorted to her room. When she threw the evidence in front of him, he initially tried to deny it, to cry and plead. But faced with irrefutable proof and Isabel's icy, razor-sharp gaze, his defenses crumbled. He collapsed to the floor, admitting everything through a torrent of pathetic tears. Isabel, I did it because I love you so much. I was jealous of Julian. I just wanted you to care more about me, to hate him. I was wrong. I truly know I was wrong. Please give me one more chance. His face was a contorted, ugly mask of tears. Isabel looked down at him, feeling not a shred of pity, only a cold, barren emptiness and a profound sense of disgust. Involuntarily, Julian's face flashed in her mind. Even at his most broken, most pained, misunderstood, and hurt by her, he had never begged like this. He was always proud, even with tears welling in his eyes. His back was always straight. In that moment, she finally understood. What she missed, what she had fallen for, what her heart truly couldn't let go of, was never Nathan, this fake, idealized phantom built on lies. It was the vibrant, real, passionate Julian, a man who burned like a fire, who, even when she had wounded him beyond measure, had once offered her his whole, genuine heart. Her sense of duty and affection for Nathan had been a pathetic act of self-deception, and her feelings for Julian, cultivated over 3 years of intimate days and nights, in those seemingly ordinary moments, had long ago seeped into her very bones, becoming a part of her. She'd just been too blind, too stubborn, too fixated on a ridiculous, idealized past love to see it. This belated, bloody awakening brought not relief, but a soul-crushing regret and pain that threatened to destroy her. After the truth was revealed, Isabel acted with lightning speed. She demanded Arthur Vance return all illegally acquired assets and used her connections to hand over the evidence of Nathan and Eleanor's financial crimes to the authorities. She broke off all ties with Nathan, a clean, decisive cut. When it was all done, she felt not a sense of release, but a deeper emptiness and a desperate urgency. She had to see Julian. Now, she had to beg for his forgiveness, even if there was only a 1 in a million chance. For the first time, she cast aside all her pride and arrogance. Like the most ordinary of women, pleading for a second chance, she waited outside the quiet villa her assistant had located for her. The night was dark and growing cold. In her hands, she held a delicate paper bag containing a cake from his favorite old-fashioned bakery, flown in just for her. She remembered he had a sweet tooth, that a bite of dessert when he was in a bad mood could instantly smooth the furrows from his brow, making him look like a contented cat. She waited in her car all night, her eyes bloodshot, her hair a mess, looking haggard and pathetic. As dawn broke, a familiar sports car pulled up to the villa. Sienna got out of the driver's seat and walked around to open the passenger door for Julian. Julian was dressed in casual loungewear, looking slightly tired but relaxed. Sienna kissed his cheek, said something that made him smile, the atmosphere between them warm and natural. The scene was a dagger in Isabel's heart. She threw open her car door and hurried over. Julian. Her voice was hoarse from the long, tense night. We need to talk. Julian turned at the sound of her voice. When he saw her, his brow furrowed, his eyes instantly guarded and distant, as if looking at an unwelcome intruder. Ms. Sterling? What are you doing here? We have nothing to talk about. His coldness was like a bucket of ice water poured over her. She took a desperate step forward, pulling out her phone, trying to show him the evidence, her words tumbling out in a rush. Julian, please listen to me. I know everything about what Nathan and his family did. I was wrong to blame you. The incident in the garden, the chandelier at the club, and your mother's car crash. None of them were accidents. It was them. I was a fool. I was blind. They deceived me. Julian held up a hand to stop her, his eyes as cold and barren as a Siberian wasteland. So, Isabel froze. Julian looked at her, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. The truth is out. And, Isabel, your apology, your regret, they mean nothing to me. His words were slow and deliberate, like a dull knife sawing through flesh. The damage is done. The humiliation I felt when you threw me away like trash, the agony of my wrist being broken in that holding cell, the despair I felt when I jumped into that freezing lake to find my mother's necklace. None of that could be erased by a half-hearted, I was wrong, or this so-called evidence. His gaze fell on the delicate paper bag in her hand, and he scoffed. You still remember I like the cake from this place? How thoughtful of you, Miss Sterling, to have it flown all the way here. He lifted his eyes to her instantly pale face, his tone light, but lethal. But I don't eat sweets anymore. They're too cloying. Makes me sick. Without another glance, he turned, unlocked the front door with his fingerprint, and went inside. With a soft click, the heavy oak door closed in her face, shutting her out completely, extinguishing every last, pathetic flicker of her hope. Isabel stood frozen, an abandoned statue in the cold morning air. The bag in her hand, the one with the cake, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, weighted down with all her regret and futility. Inside the villa, Julian leaned his back against the cold door and slowly slid to the floor. Outside, a light rain began to fall. It would be a lie to say it didn't hurt. A familiar, faint ache pulse in his chest. But mostly, he felt a sense of finality, of exhaustion and relief. Letting go wasn't as hard as he had imagined. He took out his phone. The screen lit up with a message from Sienna, sent a few minutes earlier. You okay? Julian stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen for a moment before he typed back 3 words. I'm fine. It's all in the past. Yes, it was all in the past. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Isabel stood in the downpour, lost and broken, her expensive suit plastered to her thin, pathetic frame. Rain streamed down her face, indistinguishable from tears. She looked up at the window that would never open for her again, her eyes a dead, hollow gray. She knew what she had lost, she could never get back. That cold rain seemed to soak through to Isabel's bones, but it failed to extinguish the unholy fire of regret and obsession in her heart. She returned home in a daze, and, for days, locked herself in her room, refusing to see anyone or handle any business. She just stared at the gray sky, drinking bottle after bottle of wine, the expensive Persian rug at her feet littered with cigarette ashes. Julian's words, "They mean nothing to me," echoed in her ears like a vicious curse. The way he looked at her, with the detached pity one would show a stranger, was a dull knife constantly twisting in her heart. She couldn't accept it. She couldn't accept that he had so completely cut her out of his life. She couldn't accept another woman standing by his side. The disastrous first attempt at reconciliation, instead of waking her up, only ignited a deeper, more obsessive need for control. The things Isabel Sterling wanted, she always got. She had been foolish, she had been deceived, but now she saw clearly. She had woken up, and he had to come back to her. A near-manic idea took root in her mind. She had to create a situation where he would be forced to face her, where he would need her. She immediately called her chief assistant. Her voice, hoarse from sleepless nights and alcohol, carried an undeniable command. Use every resource we have. Find out what Julian Vance's most important upcoming business deal is. I don't care how you do it, I want in. The highly efficient assistant soon reported back. Julian's team was in the final stages of negotiating a global ambassadorship with a century-old luxury jewelry brand. It was a deal that would be a monumental step up for his status in the international fashion world. A vicious glint appeared in Isabel's eyes. This was it. She immediately sent a letter of intent to the brand's headquarters on behalf of Sterling Industries, proposing a collaboration so lucrative it was practically a loss leader for her own company. There was only one condition: that they postponed signing the ambassadorship contract with Mr. Vance. The power and influence of Sterling Industries, especially in the Asian market, were undeniable. Faced with such a tempting offer and the underlying pressure, the brand's executives hesitated. The international video conference to sign the contract, scheduled for the next day, was abruptly postponed for further evaluation. The news hit Julian's team like a ton of bricks. His agent's brow was deeply furrowed with worry. Julian, dressed in comfortable loungewear, was practicing lines for an upcoming film. When he heard the news, he only frowned slightly before a faint, mocking smile touched his lips. "That's her style, all right," he said, putting down the script, his eyes cold. "Does she really think this will force my hand?" Sienna, who had been lazily playing a game on the sofa, put down her phone and walked over to him, draping an arm around his shoulders. Her tone was as confident and bold as ever. "Don't worry, I've got this. Isabel Sterling's reach isn't as long as she thinks." The rescheduled video conference convened in a tense atmosphere. On the large screen in the brand's headquarters, the faces of Julian's team, Sienna's team, and, unexpectedly yet predictably, Isabel appeared. Isabel was in her opulent office overlooking the entire city, a backdrop of skyscrapers behind her. She tried to project her usual commanding presence, but the bloodshot eyes and the weary anxiety she couldn't quite hide betrayed her inner turmoil. The brand CEO began, cautiously mentioning the more strategic partnership possibilities proposed by Sterling Industries. Isabel seized the moment, her voice, amplified by the microphone, carrying a deliberately calm, superior tone. "Sterling Industries is very optimistic about your brand's future, and we believe our partnership will be mutually beneficial. As for the choice of ambassador, I believe a more prudent consideration is necessary to ensure their image is perfectly aligned with the brand's core values." Her words were a veiled attack, a direct insinuation that Julian's qualifications or image might not be up to par. The atmosphere turned icy. Just then, Sienna's languid voice cut in, dripping with undisguised scorn. Well, Ms. Sterling, long time no see. Business in the States, not keeping you busy enough that you have to meddle in the European fashion world." She appeared in the split screen next to Julian, dressed in a casual sweater, yet radiating an effortless, aristocratic confidence. She looked directly at the CEO. "Charles, Julian's image, professionalism, and market appeal are undeniable. The Croft Family Foundation has always been one of your brand's most significant arts patrons, and I personally admire your brand's philosophy. I believe that choosing Mr. Vance as your global ambassador is the absolute right decision. As for certain irrelevant external interference." She paused, her gaze sweeping sharply to Isabel's screen. "Business is business. Don't bring your tawdry, personal dramas and manipulations to the table. It's pathetic. Julian got to where he is today through his own talent and hard work. He doesn't need anyone's charity, and he certainly doesn't need to accept any deals with strings attached." Sienna's words were a resounding slap in the face to Isabel and a clear message to the brand. The Croft family's influence in Europe was far more established than anything Sterling Industries could muster on short notice. Then Julian spoke, his voice calm. He switched to fluent French, eloquently articulating his deep understanding of the brand's century-long history, its craftsmanship, and its core spirit. He seamlessly integrated his own experiences and future vision, proposing a series of highly constructive promotional ideas. His presentation was professional, confident, and utterly charming, a stark contrast to Isabel's self-serving interference. The executives exchanged looks of admiration. Their previous hesitation vanished. The meeting concluded on a high note. The CEO made the decision on the spot. Julian Vance's global ambassadorship was officially confirmed. Isabel's screen went dark first, after a polite but distant farewell. She sat alone in her vast, cold office, the dial tone buzzing in her ear, her face ashen, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Her meticulously planned attack had not only failed spectacularly, but had served to highlight Julian's competence and Sienna's power. That night, in the penthouse of the city's most exclusive private club, Isabel dismissed everyone. The crystal ashtray in front of her was overflowing. She growled at her cowering assistant, her voice filled with the frustration and obsessive confusion of a caged beast. Why? Why won't he even give me a chance to make it up to him? Whatever Sienna Croft can give him, I can give him more. Wealth? Resources? Status? I can give him 10 times more. 100 times. What the hell does he want? The assistant, seeing her near hysterical state, hesitated before speaking softly. Ms. Sterling, perhaps. What Mr. Vance wants was never any of those things. Isabel froze, as if struck, her body rigid. He doesn't want those things? Then what does he want? For the first time, she began to truly, painfully consider the question she had never bothered to ask herself. Unconditional trust? Unwavering loyalty? Being his number one priority? Love. The realization was like a blinding flash of lightning, cutting through the fog in her mind, but it only brought a deeper confusion and a new kind of terror. As Isabel was trapped in a vortex of obsession and painful reflection, a piece of news broke, striking her world like a thunderclap. Breaking news. Catastrophic floods and landslides in the French Alps following unprecedented rainfall. Multiple towns cut off, communication lost. The urgent intelligence that followed from her assistant made Isabel's heart stop dead in her chest. Julian was in that region. He was there for a charity photo shoot with an international children's fund, right near the hardest-hit town. Currently, all communication with the area was down. His status was unknown. At that moment, Isabel was presiding over a crucial board meeting that would determine the company's strategy for the next decade. When she heard her assistant's hushed report, she shot up from her seat, her face draining of all color. Without a word of explanation, under the stunned gazes of the entire board, she dropped her files and bolted from the conference room. Get the jet ready. Now, the fastest plane we have. To Nice. No, to the nearest airport that can still take a landing. She screamed in her phone as she ran for the elevator, her voice raw with a panic and terror she had never known. Contact every local rescue agency. Hire the best teams. Money is no object. I'm going myself. Corporate strategy, business empires. All of it meant nothing in the face of the news that he might be in danger. Her mind had narrowed to a single, desperate thought. Find him. I have to find him. He can't be hurt. He absolutely cannot. Hours later, Isabel's private jet made a high-risk landing during a lull in the storm at a small, functioning airfield near the disaster zone. The weather was atrocious. She immediately transferred to a waiting helicopter and flew directly toward the cutoff area. The helicopter couldn't land, hovering instead over a relatively stable patch of ground. Ignoring the crew's protests, Isabel was the first one down the rope, landing in the thick mud. She had brought a heavily funded, highly experienced mountain rescue team with her. Ms. Sterling, it's too dangerous up ahead. The landslides are still active. You can't go in, the team leader yelled, pointing at the flood-ravaged path ahead. Cut the crap. Lead the way. Isabel's eyes were bloodshot, her voice hoarse. Her expensive coat was soaked through with rain and mud, but the desperate, wild look in her eyes was terrifying. She moved on pure instinct, a near-hopeless faith driving her forward, one treacherous step at a time. The floodwaters were icy and knee-deep. Debris constantly tumbled down the mountainside. During one small landslide, a falling rock hurtled toward a backpack containing vital rescue equipment. Without a thought, Isabel threw her body against the pack, shoving it to safety. The edge of the rock sliced her left arm open, a deep gash that bled profusely, staining the muddy water red. Ms. Sterling, a team member shouted, rushing to help her. I'm fine. Keep moving. Isabel's face was pale, sweat and rain mixing on her forehead. She tore a strip of fabric from her shirt, hastily wrapped it around the wound, and clenched her teeth, pushing forward. The pain only sharpened her focus. She had to be faster. After more than a dozen sleepless, death-defying hours of searching, they finally found him. He was in the ruins of a small, flooded schoolhouse on slightly higher ground. He was with a few teachers, calming a group of terrified children. His hair was a mess, his face pale, his clothes filthy, but his eyes were steady. He was telling the children a story, trying to soothe their fears. When Isabel, covered in mud and blood, looking like she had crawled out of hell itself, staggered into the doorway, everyone froze. Julian looked up. The moment he saw her, his pupils contracted in utter, disbelieving shock. He never would have expected to see her here, like this. Their eyes met. For a few seconds, time stood still. Isabel looked at him, whole and unharmed, and the heart that had been suspended in terror for days finally came crashing down. An overwhelming wave of relief and an indescribable sorrow shattered her composure. She ignored the searing pain in her arm, ignored her pathetic state, and rushed forward. Under the stunned gazes of everyone in the room, she threw her arms around Julian, pulling him into an embrace so tight it felt like she was trying to merge their bodies into one. Her body trembled uncontrollably, her voice a broken, ragged sob. Thank God. Thank God you're okay. Thank God. It was the near-hysterical aftermath of fearing she had lost him forever. Julian, held in her tight grip, could feel her violent heartbeat, her trembling body. He could smell the thick scent of blood, mud, and fear. His rigid posture softened for a fraction of a second. A complex emotion flickered in his eyes. Concern, a flicker of being moved, but it was quickly suppressed by logic. He pushed her away, firmly but not roughly. Taking a step back, creating distance, he looked at her bleeding arm and her disheveled appearance. His voice was calm, detached, and polite. Thank you for risking your life to come to the rescue, Ms. Sterling. I'll remember this. Then, without another look at her, he turned back to the children, as if she were just another member of the rescue team. Isabel's arms fell to her sides, empty. The relief washed away, leaving only an endless, chilling desolation. She stood frozen, all her strength gone. Just then, the sound of another helicopter filled the air. Sienna had arrived with his second rescue team and supplies. She rushed into the room, her eyes searching for Julian. Seeing him safe, she visibly relaxed. Then, her gaze fell on the devastated, seriously injured Isabel. Her expression became a complex mixture of shock, scrutiny, and a faint, almost imperceptible sense of threat. In the makeshift shelter, a medic was cleaning and dressing Isabel's wound. It was deep and required stitches. But Isabel seemed to feel no pain. Her eyes followed Julian as he moved around, helping others. She whispered to her assistant, her voice holding a pathetic, hopeful tremor. He saw my arm. Did he seem even a little bit worried? The assistant looked at her boss's pale, determined face and silently lowered her head. The answer was clear enough. The rescue operation was a seismic event, sending shockwaves through everyone involved. Seeing firsthand how Isabel was willing to risk death for Julian, Sienna felt a real and unprecedented sense of crisis. She realized Isabel's feelings were far more obsessive and profound than simple pride or regret. And while Julian remained outwardly calm, Sienna had noticed the fleeting flicker of emotion in his eyes when he'd looked at Isabel's injury. He wasn't entirely indifferent. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to solidify their relationship to rightfully stand by his side. The night before they were scheduled to leave the disaster zone, Sienna didn't plan anything elaborate. On a small hill near the shelter, under a sky full of stars, she found a quiet moment alone with him. Julian, she began, her voice unusually serious and gentle. There's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I think it's time I told you. Julian turned to look at her, puzzled. Sienna took a deep breath, her gaze intense. I know you probably think I was just an annoying brat when we were kids, always trying to compete with you. The truth is, I didn't know how else to get you to notice me. You were so bright, like a little sun, always surrounded by people. That was the only clumsy way I knew to make you remember I existed. She gave a self-deprecating smile. When we got older, I was always seen with different men, like a socialite. And I was. Because seeing you with Isabel hurt, and I didn't know what to do. It was the only way I could numb myself, and maybe I wanted you to see that I wasn't unwanted. Her voice held a note of bitterness. The moment you went abroad, I followed. It wasn't for any other reason than, "I love you, Julian. I've loved you since we were kids." Madly, her words were a warm current flowing into his heart. He stared at her, at the undisguised love and vulnerability in her eyes. For the past 3 years, Sienna's kindness, her unwavering support, he remembered it all. She had been with him through the loneliness of a foreign country, stood by him during career setbacks, stayed up with him when he was sick. Her companionship was a warm, steady presence. Sienna took his hand. "Julian, I know you're still hurting, that you haven't completely let go of the past. I'm not rushing you. I can wait. I just want to ask, will you give me a chance? Let me be with you, officially, as your girlfriend. Let me take care of you." Her confession was simple, unadorned, backed by years of sincere, unwavering companionship. Julian's heart was deeply moved. He looked at Sienna, the woman who had grown up with him, who had fought with him and laughed with him, and who had stood by him during his darkest hours. He already had deep feelings for her. Perhaps it was time to start a new, healthy relationship. Perhaps this was the only way to truly leave the past behind. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up, met her anxious gaze, and nodded slowly, a small but genuine smile touching his lips. "Okay." One word, but it sent a wave of ecstatic joy through Sienna. She threw her backs, stayed up with him when he was sick. Her companionship was a warm, steady presence. Sienna took his hand. "Julian, I know you're still hurting, that you haven't completely let go of the past. I'm not rushing you. I can wait. I just want to ask, will you give me a chance? Let me be with you, officially, as your girlfriend. Let me take care of you." Her confession was simple, unadorned, backed by years of sincere, unwavering companionship. Julian's heart was deeply moved. He looked at Sienna, the woman who had grown up with him, who had fought with him and laughed with him, and who had stood by him during his darkest hours. He already had deep feelings for her. Perhaps it was time to start a new, healthy relationship. Perhaps this was the only way to truly leave the past behind. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up, met her anxious gaze, and nodded slowly, a small but genuine smile touching his lips. "Okay." One word, but it sent a wave of ecstatic joy through Sienna. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight, as if she had just recovered a long-lost treasure. The news that they were officially a couple, though not publicly announced, quickly spread through their circle of friends. Everyone was happy for them. However, when the news reached Isabel, it was the final straw. She was in the hospital, recovering from a high fever brought on by infection from her wound. When her assistant cautiously delivered the news, Isabel first froze, then reacted as if she had heard the most unbelievable, unacceptable thing in the world. "Impossible." She shot up in bed, ripping the 4-needle from her hand, blood instantly welling up. Her eyes were bloodshot, her expression crazed. She swept the medical cart beside her bed to the floor, sending instruments and vials crashing everywhere. "How could he? How dare he?" she shrieked, all traces of her former composure gone. Sienna Croft, what right does she have? Ignoring the protests of the doctors and her assistant, she forced her way out of the hospital and drove straight to Julian's villa. She forgot her injured arm, forgot her fever, her mind consumed by a single, frantic thought. Find him, confront him. She would not allow this. She stumbled to the wrought iron gate of his villa and began pounding on it, her voice a raw, desperate scream. "Julian, come out. Tell me it's not true. You can't do this to me. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Just give me one more chance. Julian." Her crazed behavior quickly attracted security. Several large guards tried to restrain her, but she fought like a cornered animal, still screaming his name, a pathetic, disheveled mess. She was finally dragged away and put into her car. As the window rolled up, sealing off her desperate cries, a curtain on the second floor of the villa twitched. Julian stood behind it, watching the scene below. He watched the once proud woman being dragged away like a lunatic, his face impassive. Only in the depths of his eyes did a faint, complex emotion flicker. Then he pulled the curtains shut, blocking all out. Autumn leaves covered the ground in a carpet of gold. Julian, wrapped in a soft cashmere shawl, sat by the sun-drenched window, reading a new script. Sienna sat on the rug, working on her laptop, occasionally glancing up at him with a tender look. The peaceful atmosphere was shattered by a news alert on a nearby tablet. Breaking. Arthur Vance, chairman of Vance Industries, arrested for embezzlement and tax evasion. Vance Industries stock plummets. Company declares bankruptcy. Inside story. Mysterious financial giant behind the Vance collapse. The bold headlines were shocking. Julian's finger paused as he scrolled. The accompanying photo showed Arthur Vance, haggard and defeated, swarmed by reporters, a pair of gleaming handcuffs on his wrists. Julian's expression remained unchanged, as if he were looking at a stranger. Sienna closed her laptop and came to his side, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Julian shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Why wouldn't I be?" His voice was terrifyingly calm. In the following days, the news about the Vance family continued to dominate the headlines. Eleanor Hayes was caught at the airport trying to flee the country with the last of her laundered assets. And Nathan, with his father and mother in jail and the family fortune gone, had a complete mental breakdown. He tried to find Isabel, hoping she would help him for old time's sake, but he was coldly turned away by her assistant. The woman he had once seen as his greatest asset had delivered the final, fatal blow. Soon, the tabloids reported that Nathan Hayes had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. In the grainy photos, he was seen in a patient's gown, his eyes vacant and lifeless. The wheel of fortune had turned. Julian closed the news app and stood by the window. The setting sun painted the sky in magnificent shades of orange and red. Sienna hugged him from behind, her cheek pressed against his back. "It's all over, Julian," she said, her voice firm and steady. He leaned back in her warmth. He murmured. Yes, it was all over. The tangled web of hatred, the lingering resentment. It all dissolved with the fall of the Vance family. His heart was calm, as clear and vast as an autumn sky. He had finally, truly, said goodbye to his past. The annual International Film Festival award ceremony was the focus of the world. Julian, in a custom-tailored suit, walked the red carpet with Sienna. The years had softened his youthful arrogance into a mature, confident charm. Sienna, in a classic black gown, looked at him with undisguised love and pride. They were the most watched couple of the night. In New York, in the top-floor office of Sterling Industries, Isabel sat in the dark, the only light coming from the television screen broadcasting the event. When the camera zoomed in on Julian and Sienna, her heart seized in a suffocating grip. The pain, the pride, the regret. It was all a toxic, tearing mixture. The moment of truth arrived. The winner for Best Actor was Julian Vance. The hall erupted in a standing ovation. He walked to the stage, accepted the heavy trophy, his eyes glistening. He thanked the director and the crew, and then his gaze found Sienna in the audience. His voice was warm and steady. "Finally, I want to thank one person in particular. My love, Sienna Croft. Thank you for always being by my side, for giving me support and strength. This award is half yours." The camera cut to Sienna, who stood and blew him a kiss, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Isabel violently shut off the television. In the darkness, she gasped for air like a dying fish. No, she couldn't just watch him embrace another woman. She had to do something. Late that night, as Julian and Sienna were leaving the after-party, a figure stumbled out from behind a pillar in the parking garage. It was Isabel. She looked worse than ever, reeking of alcohol, her eyes bloodshot with a desperate, broken look. She stared at Julian, her voice a ragged whisper. "Julian, congratulations." She took a step forward, her voice pleading. "Let's talk. Just 5 minutes. 3. Please, give me one last chance. Please. Without you, I can't live." Sienna immediately stepped in front of Julian, her eyes cold. "Isabel, look at yourself. Get a grip. Julian is with me now, and he's happy. Stop disturbing his life." Happy. The word seemed to trigger something in Isabel. She looked up, her eyes wild. "What right do you have to make him happy? What do you know about him? Do you know he gets cold at night and hogs the blankets? Do you know he can't handle spicy food, but loves it anyway, and always needs ice water? Do you know?" "That's enough." Julian's voice cut her off. He stepped out from behind Sienna, his gaze calm as he looked at Isabel. There was no hatred, no anger, only a deep weariness and a hint of pity. "Isabel, let the past go. We ended a long time ago. It's not over. How can it be over?" Isabel lunged for his arm, but Sienna blocked her. As they argued, none of them noticed a black car at the entrance of the garage, speeding erratically toward them, the driver clearly drunk or having lost control. "Look out!" Sienna was the first to react, shouting as she tried to shield Julian with her body. But someone was faster. In a split second, acting on an instinct burned into her very soul, Isabel used every ounce of her strength to shove Julian out of the way. The force of the push sent Julian stumbling, but it left her directly in the path of the speeding car. Crash! A sickening, heavy thud echoed through the parking garage. Isabel's body was thrown in the air like a broken doll, before landing hard on the concrete several feet away. Blood instantly pooled beneath her, a rapidly spreading crimson stain. Time seemed to stop. Julian, held tightly by Sienna, stared in horror at the brutal scene, his heart seizing in his chest. He could see, in the moment before the impact, the look in her eyes. Not fear, not regret, but a strange, complex expression of release, as if to say, see, this time, I saved you first. Isabel. Sienna screamed, holding Julian tight while yelling at the security guards rushing over. Call an ambulance. Now. The scene descended into chaos. Julian looked at the still, broken figure in the pool of blood, his face ashen, his body trembling. Even with all the history, all the pain, the sight of a life being snuffed out to save his was a shock he couldn't process. Sienna held him tighter, her warm hand rubbing his back. It's okay, Julian, don't be scared. The ambulance is coming. It's okay. Her voice was a steady anchor. The light outside the operating room stayed on all night. Julian and Sienna waited on a bench in the hallway. Sienna never let go of his hand. At dawn, the surgeon emerged exhausted. He told them that Isabel's injuries were critical, but she had stabilized. She was out of immediate danger, but had been moved to the ICU. Julian and Sienna waited outside the ICU for another day and night before Isabel was finally moved to a regular room, still incredibly weak. Sienna accompanied Julian to see her. The room smelled of antiseptic. Isabel lay on the white bed, tubes connected to her body, her face a translucent white. Only her eyes, when she saw him enter, flickered with a faint light. Her lips moved, forming a weak sound. Julian. Sienna gave Julian's shoulder a squeeze, gestured that she would wait outside, and quietly closed the door, leaving them alone. Julian sat in the chair by her bed. The doctor said you're stable for now, he said, his voice flat. Isabel drank in the sight of his face, as if trying to memorize every detail. She tried to lift her free hand to touch him, but seeing the clear distance in his eyes, her arm fell back, limp. I'm sorry. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, filled with endless regret. Julian, I'm sorry. I know. No amount of apologies can make up for what I did to you. She began to speak, her words tumbling out in a broken stream, confessing everything from her initial deception by Nathan to her stubborn pride that kept her from admitting her feelings, to the agony of losing him. She apologized over and over, professing her love, her pride completely shattered. Julian, I know, I don't deserve you. I know I deserve to die. But, please, give me one more chance. Just one. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you, as my penance. Without you, being alive is no different from being dead. Tears streamed from the corners of her eyes, disappearing into the white of her hair at her temples. Julian listened quietly. When she was finished, exhausted and breathless, her hopeful eyes fixed on him, he finally spoke. His voice was soft but clear, each word a precision instrument, dissecting their past. Isabel, thank you. Thank you for saving my life. I will remember that. A flicker of hope ignited in Isabel's eyes, but his next words extinguished it completely. But love isn't gratitude, and it isn't guilt. We were over a long time ago. The moment you chose Nathan, the moment you broke my wrist, the moment you had me thrown in a cell to be tortured, every time you chose to believe him and hurt me. It was over. The cracks are too deep. They can't be fixed. My heart died a long time ago. He watched the light in her eyes fade to a dead gray. Isabel, let's just leave it at this. With that, he stood up, and without another look at her, walked to the door. Julian. Isabel's voice was a weak, desperate cry. He paused at the door, but he didn't turn back. He opened it. Outside, Sienna was waiting, her gaze warm and steady. Julian walked to her side. She took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. Together, they walked down the hallway and disappeared, never looking back. Isabel lay in the hospital bed, staring at the empty doorway, at the space where he had been. Tears finally flowed freely, soaking her pillow. She knew, this time, she had truly lost him forever. Lost the one who had once been a brilliant flame in her gray life, a flame she had personally, carelessly extinguished. Time passed. Another year went by. Julian's career reached new heights. He starred in an epic film by a legendary director and gave a powerful, heart-wrenching performance. At the industry's most prestigious awards ceremony, when his name was announced as the winner for Best Actor, the room erupted. Dressed in a stunning suit, Julian stood, embraced a tearful, ecstatic Sienna, and walked to the stage. Under the spotlight, holding the highest honor in his field, His smile was warm and powerful. He gave his speech, and at the end, his eyes found the woman who never stopped looking at him. Finally, I want to dedicate this honor to my fiancée, Sienna Croft. You made me believe that love could be this beautiful. You gave me the courage to be a better man. Ms. Croft, I look forward to spending the rest of my life with you. The camera cut to Sienna, who was on her feet, tears of pride and joy in her eyes, as she mouthed, "I love you" to him. The room filled with applause. The image of them, gazing at each other, was broadcast around the world, a portrait of pure happiness. A week later, a quiet, intimate wedding was held at a private estate. Sunlight, green lawns, flowers, and lace. Julian, in a bespoke suit, took Sienna's hand, his face radiant with a deep, genuine happiness. Their wedding invitation had also been sent to a few people from their past. In New York, in the top-floor office of Sterling Industries, Isabel stood by the massive window, looking out over the city. She was thinner than a year ago, her energy subdued, a permanent loneliness in her eyes. On her desk lay the elegant invitation, the gold lettering a sharp pain in her heart. She didn't go to the wedding. Instead, she went to the office where she and Julian had shared so many moments. The setting sun filled the room with a warm, orange glow. She stood there silently, a statue in the fading light. Her phone suddenly lit up. It was a text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. In the picture, Julian was dressed in a white suit, standing in the bright sunlight, smiling at the camera. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated happiness, free from the shadows of the past, filled only with hope and contentment. A few seconds later, another text arrived. "Isabel, I forgive you. I've also forgiven myself. Take care." Isabel stared at the photo, at the words, her heart constricting in a grip of excruciating pain that, strangely, gave way to a sense of release. Her hand trembled as she stroked the image of his happy face on the screen. Tears she could no longer control streamed down her face, blurring the image. She laughed and cried, a broken, manic sound filling the empty room. Finally, she clutched the phone to her chest, as if to absorb some lingering warmth from him. She had lost her light forever. But perhaps this was the best ending for her, to spend a lifetime of solitude and memory, atoning for a crime for which there was no other redemption. And Julian, the brilliant rose that had weathered the storm, that had been trampled into the mud, had finally broken free of his chains. In the rich soil of true love and sunlight, he was now in full, magnificent bloom, radiating his own dazzling, beautiful light. The world turned, and they went their separate ways, finally at peace.